call the meeting in order of the Wilmington City Council. I'd like to welcome all those who are with us here this evening and all those who are watching us at home. Thank you for taking an interest in your government. At this time, I'd like to introduce Reverend John Haynes, who is the pastor of the Greater Love Chapel Church, for the invocation, asking that everyone remain standing afterwards for the Pledge of Allegiance. Reverend, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At this time, we're going to turn our hearts and minds to our Lord and Savior, Father God, again. We want to thank you for this day that you have allowed us to see, for your loving kindness and your tender mercy, dear God. We tell you thank you. Now, gracious Father, we ask you to look on each and every one of us. It is fitting and proper, Lord, that you ask you to search our hearts now, dear God. If you find anything that is not pleasing in your sight, forgive us. We pray tonight, God, that you look on this council meeting on tonight. Dear Father, you know what we have on our agenda. We ask you to set your approval on it. Don't forget about our mayor and the staff on tonight, dear Lord, all the city council. Matter of fact, dear God, everyone that's in your presence here on tonight, you know what we came for. What you asked, we ask you on tonight to be the author and the finisher of this course. Let everything be done decent and in order. Lead and guide us in the right direction. Help us to make the right decisions on today, dear Lord, for your glory. So set your approval here on tonight. For your grace on tonight, God, is sufficient. We pray these blessings. Oh, yes, Lord. We don't want to forget about our children today. Remember them as well. Do it for your glory. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the blessed Holy Ghost. In Jesus' name we do pray. Amen. Thank you, Father.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First order of business is our consent agenda. Are there any items that any council member would like to hear separately? If not, what are the wishes of his council in respect to the consent agenda? We have a motion to approve by Mayor Pro Tem Haynes, second by Councilmember Barnett. Any discussion? All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye. Any opposed? That item passes unanimously. Next segment is our public information segment. No public information speakers are scheduled to speak this evening, so we'll move on to public hearings. Public hearing PH1 is a resolution of the City Council of the City of Wilmington, North Carolina, approving an amendment to an installment financing contract in an amount not to exceed $30 million to finance streets and sidewalk projects, parks and recreation projects, the construction of a new fire station, and the construction of a sports complex, and providing for certain other related matters thereto. This time I'd like to recognize City Manager Mr. Caldwell. Mr. Caldwell.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Madam Mayor Pro Tem, and members of council. Finance Director Jennifer Moretti will walk us through this item.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, council members. The item tonight is a public hearing. This is concerning our fourth amendment to the 2012 financing installment contract and the 2023A projects to be financed. The 2023A series limited obligation bonds will be used to finance various capital improvement projects in an amount not to exceed $30 million. Approval of the resolution will authorize staff to proceed with all matters necessary for this installment financing. This financing is secured by payments from the city as well as a deed of trust. The financing will include a third extension to the 2012 deed of trust, adding the River Lights Fire Station to the collateral package held with this deed of trust. The projects included with this financing include streets and sidewalk projects estimated at $11.4 million, and these are a list of those projects here. Parks and Recreation projects, estimated at $7.2 million. The Riverwalk South handrails at $700,000, and River Lights Fire Station at $8 million. We brought the item to you on February 21st with a call of the public hearing for tonight. Tonight, we ask that you hold the public hearing and approve the resolution to authorize the issuance of these bonds. April 4th, LGC will review and approve the borrowing. April 26th, we'll hold the bond pricing for these bonds. May 17th, we'll close on these bonds. And then in May, we'll bring back an ordinance for council to record the financing results. And with that, I'll answer any questions.
Are there any questions? Ms. Moretti? Thank you, Ms. Moretti.
Thank you.
This time, I'm going to open up the public hearing and ask if anyone in the public wishes to speak on item PH1. If they'll please come forward and state their name for the record. Seeing none. Madam Clerk, have you received any additional information? Okay. Are there any further questions from council? If not, I will close the public hearing and ask for the wishes of council. We have a motion to approve by Councilmember Ravenbart, second by Mayor Pro Tem Haynes. Discussion? All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye. Any opposed? Item passes unanimously. That brings us to our next item of business, which is our ordinances. Item 01 is an ordinance appropriating to the general fund $1,619 of revenue recovered through the North Carolina Hazmat Regional Response Team contract with North Carolina Emergency Management. This time I'd like to recognize our city manager, Mr. Tony Caudle. Mr. Caudle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Assistant Chief Tom Robinson will overview this item for us.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This ordinance is going to allow us to appropriate the $1,619 back into our operating fund so we can replace equipment that was lost during a hazmat response in Burgaw for a diesel fuel tank that had overturned on the highway. Any other questions about that?
Were there any questions for staff? Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you. Yes.
We have a motion to approve by Mr. Anderson, a second by Mr. Rivenbark. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Is there a motion to waive second reading? We have a motion by Mr. Barnett, a second by Mr. Anderson. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? That also passes unanimously.
That brings us to our next item of business, which is item 02, which is an ordinance appropriating $71,277 from the general fund road race and organized walk committed revenues to the municipal golf course fund for a feasibility study to improve the safety of the municipal golf course crossing on Pine Grove Drive. At this time, I'd like to recognize our city manager, Mr. Caudle. Mr. Caudle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Community Services Director Amy Beatty will overview this item for us.
Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and City Council. This ordinance would appropriate $71,277,000 collected from road race registrations that are set aside for improvements to roads, sidewalks, and greenways for a feasibility study for improvements to Pine Grove Drive crossings that service the municipal golf course. Pine Grove Drive is a 45-mile-per-hour roadway, a minor arterial bisecting the golf course. This section of Pine Grove Drive averages between 17,000 and 24,000 average daily traffic counts. There are 5 separate crossings of the roadway for an 18-hole round. It requires golfers to cross the roadway 4 times, for a 9-hole round 2 times. The purpose of the study is to analyze options to lower risks of conflicts between golfers and vehicles. 3 options will be reviewed: consolidation of the crossings, and separated grade crossings both above ground and below ground. The analysis will include impacts to pace of play and will include cost estimates. I'll try and answer any questions that you have.
Mr. Barnett?
Amy, didn't we do something like this a while back?
This is the first time that we have done a feasibility study for this type of project. We have talked about it at a few of your past budget work sessions, so that may be why it sounds familiar, but we have not actually done any studies or any projects towards a permanent solution. We have done some non-permanent consolidations of crossings to see how that would work, but nothing's permanent has been done at this point.
Okay, so when we didn't we do some kind of sign or something out there? Didn't we?
We have added additional signage, but it does remain a concern, not just for golfers, but for the drivers of the vehicles as well. In many cases, what happens is a vehicle will stop for a golfer crossing, and the driver in the vehicle behind them won't be paying attention, and they have to stop short, so there are rear-end collisions. So the Golf Course Advisory Board and staff sees this as a top concern to try and reduce the conflicts. So we think the next best step is to engage an engineering firm to conduct an analysis.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Amy, how many rounds is being played at the municipal gardens? I know that with Echo Farms closing, and I believe the Cape is closed, seems like the rounds have picked up, the amount of people that are playing the course has picked up a lot.
60,000 rounds annually is what's being averaged.
How many?
60,000. You can't really fit many more, so we're doing great business out there, and again, that's another impetus to get this study done.
So a lot of people crossing back and forth across that road.
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good. Okay, any other questions? Okay. Mrs. Spears, I'm sorry.
Amy, is the $71,000 the cost of the feasibility study, or is this just what we're setting aside to do this?
That is the cost of the study. We issued a task order for one of engineering's on-call engineering contractors, and we submitted to them the scope of what we wanted to have done, and the $71,277 is the fee that they said would be required to perform the study. And again, these are from what we call committed revenues. When anybody has a road race that is permitted by the city collects $1 per every registrant, and that is set aside for funding that specifically is meant to be used for improvements to sidewalks, greenways, and roadways. And so I would want to point out that although this is, this hopefully will improve playing conditions and safety of golfers, we're also trying to protect the drivers of the motor vehicles, as I just described, to lower the risk of drivers getting into a crash in this area.
Got you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, no other questions, we have a motion approved by Councilmember Barnett, second by Councilmember Ravenbark. Discussion, all in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye. Any opposed? The item passes unanimously on first reading. Is there a motion to waive second reading? Motion made by Mayor Pro Tem Haynes, second by Councilmember Anderson. Discussion, all in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye. Any opposed? The item passes unanimously on first as well as second reading. That brings us to our next item of business, which is item 03, which is an ordinance amending various project and grant funds for the adjustments and corrections from budget to actual funding and expenditures. And at this time, I'd like to recognize City Manager, Mr. Caudle. Mr. Caudle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Moretti will do a second curtain call on this one for us.
Good evening again. The ordinance before you this evening is amending various capital project and grant funds for adjustments and corrections from budget to actual funding and expenditures. As we work through the fiscal year, we identify items that need adjustments to budget appropriations to accurately reflect the activities occurring. Included in this ordinance are the following adjustments and corrections. An appropriation of ARPA funding in the amount of $250,000 to provide funding for the stormwater project at 10th and Grace. We previously brought this item to council with the ARPA plan, but had not brought forward the action to make the actual transfer of funds to the stormwater project. This appropriation will cover this funding. In FY20, an appropriation was brought to council to temporarily loan $892,000 of parking funds to the River Place Parking Deck project, as the closeout and value engineering credits were being identified and applied back to the project. We are now repaying the loan to the parking fund, and appropriation to transfer these funds back is now needed. Next, we have the donation that was received by the city in the amount of $66,000, which was meant for the North Riverfront Park project. Due to this donation being received in a prior year and inaccurately recorded in the general fund, an appropriation is needed to move these funds from the general fund to the project where they have budget appropriation to be used towards the cost of the project. We also have multiple CDBG and home grant year adjustments included with this ordinance to adjust the budget appropriation to the actual award of HUD funding, as well as appropriating the use of program income for each grant year. Oftentimes, we are budgeting the current year's amount for the next year until they pass their budget, and then we need to go back and adjust it to the actual award. Finally, the city received notification that the 2020 CDBG grant was overdrawn for administration costs exceeding the allowable 20% amount. We must return these funds to the line of credit, and then we can draw the funds back down to use for an eligible activity. We'll use general funding allocated for administration to cover the costs and then appropriate this amount to use on an eligible loan activity. And with that, I'll answer any questions that you have on this ordinance.
Is there any question from Ms. Moretti? Okay,
All right, thank you.
all right. Thank you. Any further questions from council? If not, what are the wishes of council in respect to the ordinance? We have a motion to approve by Councilmember Barnett, second by Councilmember Rivenbark. Discussion, all in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye. Any opposed? The item passes unanimously on first reading. Is there a motion to waive second reading? Motion made by Mayor Pro Tem Haynes, second by Councilmember Waddell. Discussion, all in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye. Any opposed? The item passes unanimously on first as well as second reading. That brings us to our next item, which is item 04, which is an ordinance making supplemental appropriation in the amount of $317,500 to the 17th Street Sidewalks Project from the Transportation Bonds Contingency / Bike / PED Project. This time I'd like to recognize the City Manager, Mr. Caudill. Mr. Caudill.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Project Manager Richard Murphy will overview this item for us.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. Before you tonight's an ordinance for supplemental appropriation, the amount of $317,500 from the Transportation Bonds Contingency Fund for the 17th Street Sidewalk Project. If approved, this appropriation will cover the difference between the budgeted funds and the expected construction cost, including a 10% construction contingency. As part of the Transportation Bond Program, this project will install new sidewalks along the 17th Street corridor from just south of Martin Street through the Oak Grove Cemetery, including enhanced lighting in that area, up to the north side of the CSX Railroad crossing. Bids were opened in February, and this appropriation will allow the city manager to enter into a construction contract with Jimco Construction out of Smithfield, North Carolina. They were the lowest responsible bidder. The staff recommends approval of this ordinance, and I'm happy to answer any questions at this time.
Are there any questions, staff?
How many people bidded on this?
Well, this was the second time. This time, two.
Just two?
Last year, there was one.
Okay, thanks.
I know you probably answered this, but just out of curiosity, you couldn't run the sidewalk up South 17th Street? You had to go around the back side of the cemetery? I guess there's a significant elevation difference there? Is that what it is?
Yes, actually along that along the street there was not feasible because, I have it written here, oh yeah, there was actually graves within our right-of-way
Okay.
on that slope.
I understand. Okay, very good.
So we need to meander through the yard. And just so you know, the county is going to maintain the properties. We have to maintain the sidewalk and enhance lighting, but the county itself will maintain.
So there will be enhanced lighting on the backside there?
Yes, and the county's going to put up some informational signage because of the history of that
Sure.
area.
Okay, very good. Mr. Anderson?
I can't resist. How do we, I guess I can think of just so many other places where we have lots of more foot traffic. And how do we pick these projects? I mean, I know you can't put out a little wire across and see how many, like you can with a car and take trip counts and all that, but it is just, it's interesting. We pick stuff where you don't have the goat paths and the pedestrians, and you pick a project that's really complicated versus using the money for a project where their need is great and obvious. How do we pick them like this? It's hard for me to understand, I'll be honest with you.
Okay. Well, I know for this particular one, there is a sidewalk up to where we're going to tie in just south of Martin, and the sidewalk continues by the railroad track. So right there's a gap, and I believe it was just to tie the neighborhoods together. It's becoming more, popular up there with the cargo district and all, so it's just to tie the communities together.
We got a lot of those. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, sir.
No, thank you.
What are the wishes of council in respect to the ordinance? We have a motion to approve by Mayor Pro Tem Haynes, second by Councilman Waddell. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye. Any opposed? Item passes unanimously on first reading. Is there a motion to waive second reading? Motion made by Councilman Barnett, second by Councilman Rivenbark. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye. Any opposed? Item passes unanimously on first as well as second reading. That brings us to our next item of business, which is a resolution accompanied by an ordinance, and I'll read both of them, so we'll take a vote on both of them after we've heard the discussion from the manager's office. Item 05A is the resolution authorizing the city manager to execute the Golden Leaf Foundation grant agreement in the amount of up to $250,000 to support the Clear Run Branch Drainage Improvement and Stream Restoration Project. And item 05B is the ordinance appropriating the $250,000 from the Golden Leaf Foundation Grant Award for the Clear Run Branch Drainage Improvement and Stream Restoration Project. This time I'd like to recognize our city manager, Mr. Caudle. Mr. Caudle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Stormwater Services Manager Fred Royal will overview these items for us.
Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, Council. This is a grant award from Golden Leaf for the Clear Run project. We applied for this grant over almost a year ago, so we're delighted to get it. As you know, the College Acres Drive project, Clear Run Branch, is a very expensive project. So we'll continue to look for grants to help us out along Phase 1 and Phase 2. So this is I consider it a win, but Golden Leaf has a lot of stipulations, so we had to meet their requirements, so we've managed to do that.
Mr. Rivenbark has a question.
Regardless of whether we ever get another grant award or not, we are funded in its entirety from
That's
start
correct.
to finish. Thank you.
Any other questions? Tony, I think you know this. I think this is the amount of money that was received when the bill was passed with the stormwater resiliency and recovery, the thing that we had worked on with about 60 other elected leaders in the eastern part of the state in the aftermath of Hurricane Florence. That was one that Tony and McEwen had worked on diligently up there. And of course, they're getting more money hopefully into that bill for this coming year, but this kind of pays dividends for us. It's sweet to see us bringing some of this coming back to the community, which was also very much advocating for this additional funding and money from the from the state, which ended up becoming a statewide bill of almost $800 million. So that's good to see.
Yes, sir,
coming
that's
back.
correct. It was a result of the regional effort, as you said, that joined 40-some-odd local governments together to lobby on the behalf of funding to come to eastern North Carolina. And there have been other communities that have benefited as well, but this is one area in which we will benefit, especially with regard to this particular crossing.
Good. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Rule. Appreciate
Thank
it. What are the wishes of council in respect, first of all, to the resolution, which will only take one vote? We have a motion to approve by Councilmember Barnett, second by Councilmember Anderson. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Item passes unanimously. Now let's go to item 05B, which is the ordinance appropriating the $250,000 from the Golden Leaf. What are the wishes of council? We have a motion to approve by Mayor Pro Tem Haynes, second by Councilmember Rivenbark. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? That item passes unanimously on first reading. Is there a motion to waive second reading? Motion made by Councilmember Waddell, second by Councilmember Barnett. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye. Any opposed? Item passes unanimously on first as well as second reading. That brings us to our next item of business, which is our resolutions. Item R1 is a resolution adopting March 2023 City of Wilmington Hope ARP allocation plan. At this time, I'd like to recognize City Manager, Mr. Caudle. Mr. Caudle?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Community Development and Housing Planner Suzanne Rogers will review this item for us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Caudle, Mayor Saffo, Mayor Pro Tem Haynes, City Council members. As you recall, at your last meeting, March 7th, there was a public hearing on this item, and you had some additional questions and asked me to bring some additional information, which I've done tonight. Mayor Saffo and others asked for an update on affordable and workforce housing units that City Council has supported over the last year. So we'll start with that update for your information and the public. As you are well aware, Council has supported affordable housing and made it a priority in your planning and in your actions over the last several years, and in fact over many decades. So when you look at conditional district workforce housing units, projects that took advantage of extra density for including workforce housing, you can see 6 projects here that did add those additional workforce units. So out of a total of 1,702 units, 200 of those were workforce and affordable housing units, 128 of those used the density incentive and didn't request any gap funding. And so these affordable units are affordable to folks at 80% AMI and below at very affordable rents. Looking at general rezonings with workforce housing, you're familiar with, of course, the Starway project and the action that you took to convey the old Carolina Beach Fire Station for redevelopment into permanent supportive housing. So these are a great deal of units, one of the largest projects we've ever had, 311 total that will be 100% affordable for our working families here in the city. And then projects that didn't require land use action that you acted on, the Driftwood rehab to bring a vacant and not used permanent supportive housing project back online to provide that housing for those disabled and chronically homeless folks. And so that's 15 units there for a total of 526 units that council has approved over the past year. So of the 2,028 units that came to the city through the development process and the affordable housing funding process, that represents 26% of those units. So just quickly for the public's education and a quick refresher, these projects, of course, are complicated and important, and you are well aware of your commitment, financial commitment with ARPA funds, and other state and federal funds that were required to bring Starway online. So a partnership between the city and the county. Same thing with Canopy Point, which recently had a groundbreaking. In this case, gap financing of $1.85 million was provided with general funds that you designated for this purpose. Again, 72 units of senior housing in our community. And then just really quickly, some examples of projects that council has supported over the years. Certainly the Lakeside Reserve project at the old armory over by Greenfield Lake. Again, as with all these projects, a combination or a stack of financing to bring those 40 units online back in the 2016, 17, 18 time period by the time construction was finished. This is back in 2009, but I think a very important project for the north side, working with the Wilmington Housing Authority, the complete redevelopment of the old Taylor homes to new Brooklyn homes, 196 units, 98 of those senior, and a significant improvement in that community and really quality housing. You also supported Lake Ridge over on Lake Avenue, a senior project with some federal funds that the city has as well as private funds. Did I do that? Sorry. You've supported various smaller projects and rehabs shown here, supportive housing at Pierce House and Greenville Trace, as well as Willow Pond, and of course, ongoing partnerships with our local nonprofits over the years, continual support of Habitat, WARM, and the Cape Fear Community Land Trust to build new units. So again, very important work that council has supported and done and continues to do and increase your commitment to. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, next one. And now to focus in on the some of the questions that arose around the home ARP allocation plan that the public hearing was on last week. Just a quick review, a recap of that. As you all are aware, through the American Rescue Plan, funds were designated to HUD and to the city of Wilmington through the Home ARPA program of $2,513,506. The guidelines for Home ARPA require that those funds be used for qualifying populations. That includes homeless, both sheltered and unsheltered, those fleeing domestic violence, human trafficking, sexual assault, dating violence, stalking, those at risk of homelessness due to very low incomes, and any veterans who meet that criteria. The guidelines also tell us what eligible activities the funds can be used for. Production of affordable housing, including permanent supportive housing, tenant-based rental assistance, which is 24 months of assistance, supportive services, the purchase or development of non-congregate shelter. The guidelines also require that we consult with the local continuum of care and homeless shelter and service providers, which we did through stakeholder interviews, surveys, and attending meetings, and we asked them what their priority would be for the use of these funds, and they responded permanent supportive housing, and which HUD recognizes as a best practice, as does the Veterans Administration, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Federal Agency, and the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. When we look at
Excuse me, Suzanne, we have Mr. Anderson has a question.
oh, yes, sir.
It might be, I don't know how long this is, so didn't want you to get 6 slides away. Can you go back one? Just because I've gotten, it's amazing usually when we have something that's broad ranging. Can you go back a slide? There you go.
That one?
We don't get a whole lot of commentary because it requires a lot of digging in and reading and understanding it. And I found myself, I've got a few calls about this particular item, and Just to educate, can you describe non-congregate and congregate for the viewers?
Sure. Well, as you can imagine, certainly the pandemic made it very clear that having folks reside in a shared space pose some real health risk. So non-congregate shelter is shelter in which people are not sharing, sleeping in one room in a sort of a bunkhouse type situation where they have a single room or some division for health purposes, generally speaking.
So if I received a call or email and someone said, why don't y'all use some of this money for, situations of extreme weather, cold, heat, or for provide showers or something along those lines, showering, that which was talked about, I think, when we were, I remember the last discussion we had about this with the county was something about day shower or something, just for life or death situations when it's, 9 degrees, or we don't have that very often, but, freezing temperatures and stuff like that, or extreme heat, or like just public health with the showers. That could not be used here. Is that fair to say? You couldn't use the money for something like that? Not all of it, but I mean, just say some small percentage.
Are you describing, if I make sure I understand, are you describing a day shelter or
Well, I guess you'd say, somewhere where you let folks in when it's extreme weather.
emergency shelter,
yeah.
a temporary emergency shelter?
It happens all the time, but our
Sure.
churches are the ones that we have to rely on to do it.
Absolutely.
So I'm just,
I don't believe, based on my understanding of the guidelines, that would be, meet an eligible activity if it would be a congregate shelter.
so, and showers sound pretty congregate too, I guess, or something like what's your analysis of that? I couldn't answer these questions, so you're answering them for me right now.
So we know that some organizations provide shower trailers and services like that.
Would that fall under supportive services, perhaps?
That may fall under supportive services. I think it would need to be linked, to some other things. We'd have to dig a little deeper into that. I mean, I haven't had that. That didn't come up in our conversations, and I haven't had that direct question posed.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Waddell?
just a point of clarification, non-congregate emergency shelter, short-term shelter absolutely is called out as an allowable use for these funds, correct?
Non-congregate?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Non-congregate, yes, sir, absolutely. I apologize if I misspoke. Yes, okay. So this slide shows how our area compares to other areas in the state in terms of the number of homeless per 10,000 people. And actually, you'll see that the Cape Fear region has the lowest rate in the state for homeless per 10,000 people. Asheville-Buncombe County experiences the highest rate of homeless per 10,000 with 20.9, and you'll see Durham at 10.9, and other cities there. I won't read that all to you, but certainly every community has homeless persons in need in their community, and so we are actually doing a little bit maybe better, or don't have the problem to the degree that other places do. In terms of available resources that are ongoing coming into our community for operating and for supportive services and for rapid rehousing, the HUD Continuum of Care receives about $770,000 or so a year, which most of that goes towards supportive services and some towards rapid rehousing. The state passes through HUD funds through the Emergency Solutions Grant, which is used for rapid rehousing of folks. And then FEMA has an ongoing program, Emergency food shelter program that helps shelters with operating expenses of about $86,000. So in total, just those federal dollars that are coming into our community each year, that's a little over $1 million for operating supportive services and rapid rehousing. That doesn't include other funding, donations, and grants and other things that these various agencies receive to support their work. I think you asked about inventory. I won't read this in detail. You can see it here, but in terms of emergency shelter, transitional domestic violence, permanent supportive and rapid rehousing resources, beds that are made available, about 430 in our community that go through the Cape Fear Housing Continuum of Care. There may be others that we're not catching because they're not in that system and reporting. So you can see from this chart that the current inventory of emergency beds can accommodate approximately 600 persons a year as we are right now. Because emergency shelter is a short-term event, and it's not intended for people to be in emergency shelter for a long period of time. The focus is on helping them resolve their crisis. And that usually happens except for chronically homeless, who by definition are those folks who are experiencing long periods of homelessness, and homelessness occurring over time, over several years on and off. So if we look at the population of homelessness and compared to the population growth overall, for a 10-year period, you can see, and we all know that our city and county has increased in population by about 16%. The total homeless population has in fact decreased during that time by 26%. That's what that yellow line indicates there. But when we look at the subpopulation of chronically homeless over that period, which is sort of the gray line at the bottom, don't have a pointer, you can see that population, even though a small subset, has actually doubled over time. So those folks in our community have increased. Again, those are disabled individuals who experience homelessness for a long time. When we just look at that population of chronic homeless over that 10-year period, you can see that there have been, times early on when we had significant numbers, and then with the intervention of some permanent supportive housing in 2017 and 18, Phase 1 and Phase 2 of Lakeside Reserve, we did see a decrease in the chronic homeless population. That is the last permanent supportive housing that has come online in our community, and so we're now seeing an increase in that chronic homeless population here from 2019, 20, and until today. So looking at the data that we have, about 92 chronically homeless persons in our community. So how do chronically homeless persons get to permanent shelter? Well, they can enter permanent shelter going through the emergency shelter system, where they receive assessment and counseling and placement, or they can get to permanent housing directly from the street. So it's not a requirement that you go through a step program and go to shelter first and that kind of thing. So folks have entered both ways. It's just getting them into the shelter, the permanent shelter, and stabilizing them. That is the goal. So again, just looking at that chronically homeless population that we're focusing on with the home ARPA allocation recommendations, this shows both the sheltered and unsheltered, and we can see over that same 10-year period an increase in unsheltered chronically homeless persons over time, which is what we're seeing in our community now with about 73 unsheltered chronically homeless persons, at least in our community. So that is, I hope, an update or clarification of some of the questions that were asked with the presentation and public hearing at your last meeting, and before you have the resolution to adopt the home ARPA plan as presented, or take whatever action you deem best. And I'm happy to try to answer any questions.
Are there any additional questions, Mr. Rivenbark?
You used a word early in your presentation talking about the financing, that it was complicated, and that's, truer words were never spoken. It's very complicated, lots of strings attached. Secondly, you have to have numbers to start. You have to have numbers and the count, and I've taken part in some of those counts through my role on COG. It's a very fluid number, and we have seasons where it grows, and there are a lot of people out there that we discover with the large amount of development that's going on in our region, and generally it's in close, where not way out. We're finding these tremendous camps that don't want to be counted, that don't. Many of them have jobs they go to every day. So on our best day, it's kind of a crapshoot when we're out here talking about these numbers, and get the numbers that we're helping. It needs to be 10 times that or 20 times that, and it's just a money thing and a time thing, and finding the facilities to put these things in. And Neil's point about, not just me, but we've talked about a day center for years, and I know that Miss Katrina Knight out at the Good Shepherd, they provide those services. But I don't know that it can handle everything. So I know that the county at one point talked about the Salvation Army building, and a lot of people thought that that was not the right place. Well, you know what? I don't know that there is a right place. It just has to be done, because no matter where you put it, it's going to run into extreme opposition. It takes a great deal of will up here for this body and other elected bodies to pull the trigger on that. And I hope tonight that we can go some ways toward alleviating some of these numbers that we're looking at. Thank you.
Yes, sir, thank you.
Mr. Waddell?
Appreciate this report and answering some of the follow-up questions that I had. And my position on the efficacy of Housing First as a prevailing policy for addressing homelessness remains the same as it did before, and continues to be strengthened by data that I'm finding. But I'm not intending to rehash all that this evening, because I don't believe I have support from my fellow council members. But when we talked about non-congregate housing, and basically it seemed like in your report that we have more than enough. Is that the position of the COC?
I can't speak for the COC. I did consult with them. I didn't ask them that specific question. I believe that we have limited resources, to Councilman Rivenbark's point, and so unfortunately we are not going to solve the entire homelessness problem with these dollars. We hope to use these one-time dollars to leverage other funds. That was the general thinking of the folks that we consulted with. So what we saw in the data that we have, and I will absolutely agree with Councilman Rivenbark that we do not have complete data, and we don't get to count everyone, and it is a dynamic and changing population. But the best we can do, we think that the emergency shelter that is available now is serving approximately 600 persons a year. And the key to that, again, is that they're not staying in that emergency shelter for a long time. The intent is for them to stay there for the shortest amount possible, and for them to get their crisis resolved. And using that approach, the feeling is that emergency shelter at this point, for those who use it, and are willing to use it is handling that. Now, we do get, vacancy reports, and it ebbs and flows, and sometimes they're fuller than other times. But overall, what was reported or indicated to me in conversations was that permanent supportive housing, building more units of housing for a very vulnerable population was a preferred choice for the limited resources available.
All right, so we don't need any more non-congregate shelters, so that's why we're not funding that. And then affordable housing, we've done enough, so we don't need to allocate any of this money to building more affordable housing, or we wouldn't be able to leverage that money to the same extent? Is that why we didn't allocate any to affordable housing as a call out?
Well, we certainly don't have enough affordable housing, and I think you could probably talk to anyone on the street and they might agree with that. And as we reported earlier, you all are making significant strides in that area. With these funds, affordable housing would be housing for those at 30% or below who are deemed at risk of homelessness, and those folks certainly exist in our community. So it's not a case of we don't have this problem, so we don't have to address it. It's a case of, with a limited one-time resource, how can we leverage the most out of it within the constraints of the funding?
Sure. And then when I had asked about the intent of the recommendation to utilize the 84% towards the production of permanent supportive housing, whether that was community site or scattered site, and the answer was that units constructed may be on one site or scattered sites. Do we have any indication of a percentage that would go towards one or the other? I would certainly hope that we would attempt to do community site rather than scattered site. The folks that we are putting in these houses are in, as you put it, just the worst of the worst from a mental standpoint, from a substance use standpoint. I mean, they're having a rough time. And so putting people by themselves in an apartment somewhere that we're just paying for, a single site, is, to me, and there's evidence to back this up. There was an Ontario study about, which I'm sure you're familiar with, that folks actually were worse off when they were in scattered site permanent supportive housing than they were just being on the street. So I hope we can kind of take some of that into consideration as we're looking towards it. And I don't know if it's within our purview to make a condition that any money goes towards permanent supportive housing must be community site rather than scattered site. If I'm outside of the realm of what we're allowed to mandate here, but that would certainly be something that I think would be a responsible condition for us to put on this money.
I appreciate that input, and I think you some valid points. This is one step in many steps, and what the HUD guidelines have asked us to do at this point is determine how we want to allocate the funds based on the eligible activities, and if we want to give a preference to any of the eligible or qualifying populations. So we will submit a plan to HUD. They will give us some feedback, most likely, and then we have time to develop the specific request for proposals. So we definitely have some time before these funds go out the door. This is just one step.
Council will have some input before those funds actually go out the door to their final destination.
Yes, council will definitely have input as we develop the request for proposals. The definition of permanent supportive housing as it is practiced here is that supportive services are provided with that housing. So I'm familiar a little bit with some of the models or that you reference in Ontario and pathways and things like that, where the focus is on housing and housing stability. Here there is case management in the permanent supportive housing that we think has been the most effective in our local community, and that has been what we have done with any permanent supportive housing that council has approved in the past. Most recently, that would be Driftwood, which when it comes online will have on-site case manager and property manager as well. So I recognize your point and your concern, and it is valid. And we would definitely attempt to do that, and council will see the request for proposals and would, of course, approve any awarding of funding. And as Mr. Councilman Rivenbark talked about, that will be, again, a complicated process because we've said in the plan that we, based on our prior experience with affordable housing, including the supportive housing, we think that we could leverage, or that the developers, whoever does this, could leverage about $7 for every dollar of this, and we could yield 66 units, which would make a big dent in that 92 number that fluctuates. So I hope that is helpful.
Mr. Barnett?
Okay, thank you for the presentation, number one. Yesterday, I had an opportunity, last night, to attend a homeless forum sponsored by Vigilant Hope. And we were at the Harrelson Center, the plaza, and it was packed. It was packed. And one of the things, and the reason I bring that up is because I want us to all be aware that folks in our community know that we do have a housing problem, you know, and a homeless situation. My understanding is perhaps the scattered situations may work partially for us if we've got the land. I think that may be one of the reasons why that could be one of an option. But I do like the idea of making sure that we continue with the permanent supportive housing, and we do not have enough. One of the things that came out of the session we were in last night was that even though we may move them from under the library, you know, they're still there. You know, we still have that situation. And there are a number of people who are sleeping on couches. There are a number of families who are sleeping, 3 and 4 families in a home, you know, and so some people still sleeping in cars. So I like the approach. I love the idea. As mentioned, you said it's a one-time fund, so I think that we're getting a good bang for our bucks. So I appreciate the effort. Thank you.
Spears?
Suzanne, anywhere in your slides did you provide the information that calls to homelessness?
The cause of homelessness? No, sir, we did not.
But off the top of your head, could you tell us what those causes are? Just 4 or 5?
Well, when you talk to some folks who are homeless providers, they would say the cause of homelessness is a lack of housing. Now, how people come to not have housing, I'm sure, is as varied as all of us unique individuals. And I think that one of the things at the forum last night that was discussed is, you know, that homeless people, like everyone else, have different challenges and circumstances, and sometimes they resolve those crises with a little support, sometimes with family support, and sometimes it takes a little more intervention. So I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all kind of problem. Most complicated problems that you all deal with certainly aren't, and there's probably not one simple answer, unfortunately.
All right. Well, I was asking because I think when a lot of people look at what contributes to homelessness, they think irresponsibility or substance abuse or things of that nature. And so as us being the governing body, we don't want to paint that picture to the audience. We want to be very supportive of people who are clearly unfortunate and try to provide whatever assistance we can. thought I'd share that. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Anderson?
Sounds like this question may be kind of, you covered it a little bit, I guess with Luke, because I guess the word, I'm looking at the little budget, it's not up right now. The proposed spending, the 2 million for the, I would think permanent by its own, I mean, you lease apartments, all of, one here and one over there, it's not permanent. Somebody owns that building. So I guess when I saw that, I thought that meant we were going to you'd get a hard asset out of it. And I like that instead of something that, a ton of it going to programming that then we got to come up with the revenue future years. Could you just, again, going back to emails and phone calls, like just give like 1 or 2 examples of supportive services and 1 or 2 examples of nonprofit capacity. The other 2 line items. They're just kind of.
Oh, okay.
They're just kind of.
The capacity building, I think we had recommended about $50,000 there. In looking at, this will be something that we will explore further with the Cape Fear Continuum of Care. The Cape Fear Continuum of Care has just started a strategic planning process. They have an outside consultant. So nothing has been determined hardcore, but in my preparation of the plan, one thing that's pretty clear to me is you want people to go through, people who are at risk of homelessness or whatever, to go through a process where they're assessed and helped, called coordinated entry. But there's a phone number that's not available for a long period of time, 7 days a week, maybe 12 hours. It's limited because of limited resources. So to me, that is a capacity issue as an example. But I can't say that's how that would be used.
No, just examples.
Yeah. I think we've seen tonight data collection and how to get better data might be something as well.
And supportive services would be
Supportive services.
servicing more, like we already do help contribute to a lot of different supportive services. Is this just in addition to or something new?
It could be a number of things. Typically, one of the major things that you're going to see is case management, where you have a trained professional who is meeting with that person who is a housing crisis and working with them to get them to resources and maybe working to get them into housing, with landlords and other folks they have relationships with. The one thing about supportive services is that we won't use these funds to duplicate any existing supportive services. So there might have been an instance where substance abuse treatment was not available. That could have been an applicable supportive service, but if it is available and you can connect to that, then you wouldn't use these funds for that, because we have to stretch the funds as far as they will go. But that's an example of supportive services, case management,
Sounds like that's
taking people to health appointments, maybe following up with them that they're taking their meds, things like that.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Waddell?
I promise not to belabor this, so sorry. But there is no requirement, though, for anyone who is placed in permanent supportive housing. They can continue to be on, if they are suffering from substance abuse disorder, we'll say a heroin addiction, there's no requirement that they address that, correct?
There is a lease that people enter into, like with any apartment, so they can't have illegal substances. Now they may continue to use. They would have a support from a case manager offering them resources and ways to get treatment services.
But no real incentivization.
as much as much as a case manager can provide.
The reason I bring that up, I know it's common, I've heard it as a common refrain, that the majority of the folks that we're putting in permanent supportive housing don't have mental health conditions and don't have substance abuse disorder, don't suffer from substance use disorder. And if so, we're an anomaly nationwide, because, I mean, I'm looking at a report from the California Policy Lab on health conditions among unsheltered adults in the U.S., and that brought 15 or 16, maybe more states and aggregated their homeless data. 78% of the homeless that they brought into this report suffered from mental health conditions, and 75% suffered from substance abuse conditions, and a large majority had a trimorbidity, including physical health conditions as well. So that's a major sticking point that I have with our Housing First initiative in the permanent supportive housing. Not going to get into all of it too much, but I think more supportive services to address this opioid issue that we certainly have here is warranted and would be warranted with this money.
Mr. Barnett?
I guess, one of the things that we talked about last night at the forum was that, as you mentioned, many people that are suffering with homelessness right now, the reasons are so varied. There's different as the hair on my head, And the other thing we think about is Tom sent an excellent article to us that listed a number of substance services that are presented in this situation. And I just want to remind all of us that one of the statements that one of the guys made last night was that a number of people in our county are probably one paycheck away from being homeless. It's just, that's scary, and you think about it, because it's not oftentimes because they're on drugs or because they made bad decisions. It's just life, And so I think that this is a great opportunity for us to really serve some folks that really need our help. So I thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Hey, Suzanne, real quick, I know we're approving, or hopefully going to approve this tonight, but also the county also, as counterpart to this, has also got some funding that they're going to be supported with this supportive housing, because I know they've set aside $15 million, I think, for 3 years or 5 years, in addition to the things that they also support through their social services that are provided to them primarily through the state funding. Is that correct? We're not the only ones in this battle, is what I'm trying to say.
In this battle overall, no, sir,
Okay.
certainly not. As the request for proposal is developed, as we work through that and what we want to see in terms of a permanent supportive housing, what kind of services and those things, then we'll put that out, and the successful applicant will have to bring a lot more resources to the table. And I would expect them to go to the county, the state, and other places as well.
Well, I think what I just want to share with the community that listening and the folks that are out here tonight, and I know a lot of people are working on this, and a lot of advocacy groups and individuals and the faith-based communities are also working on. Everybody's trying to do their best they can. I just want to bring the complexity and the pressures that we all feel at the local level is the fact that we have one of the fastest growing states in the union. We got 1 million additional people that are moving into this state in the next 10 years. And if you calculate and you break it down, that's 100,000 people a month that are moving into the state of North Carolina. It's about, it's the magnitude of the amount of people that are moving here. And as I've said all along, the demand is much greater than the supply, and the land availability is dwindling. And so the impact that we're all feeling is that we need more affordability, and we all agree to that. 10,000 home sites, whatever the case may be. That's going to be determined based on, number one, is property owners that are willing to develop their property when they're willing to develop it, how much it's going to cost to develop it, what we're willing to participate or partner with with the private sector as well as ourselves, and with possibly working with Wilmington Housing Authority and others for redevelopment. So there's going to be a lot of players involved in this process. We'll never, I believe, will get to the point where we can fix it all together. But let's go back 20, 30 years when you don't have the pressure of the population growth that is coming into the state, that is coming into the region, and you see a different city and you see a different community, and you had affordability. There was a lot of inventory out there and people could move around. Well, that's not the case today, and it's getting more and more difficult. The reason I'm saying all this, because we're all working on this. Everybody is trying to work together, and we're using the best practice methods to try to leverage the amount of money that we're receiving from the taxpayers at the federal, state, and the local level to maximize that return on investment and to be able to put as much supportive housing on there. I mean, personally, 526 units in 1 year, 26%, is a pretty good lick. Can we do better? Absolutely. We've also got county that's involved in this. I know they've approved 2 projects in the unincorporated areas that is not also part of that number.
Yes, sir.
But I say all this because I don't want people to think that we're not trying. We are. And if people have greater and better ideas, well, let's hear them. I've heard what the problem is. We all know what the problem is, but we've all been trying to attack it any way we can from a lot of different ways, and with a lot of different people working on this thing. So I first of all commend y'all for looking best practices, to look at the groups that are out there, like Katrina and her group, that are doing good work out there and partnering with those particular folks. To Luke's point, yeah, nobody wants to put somebody into a home that needs supportive services and just place somebody there. I don't think we try to do that. I think what we try to do is try to bring those supportive services and wrap it around the individual that needs it for whatever known reason. We don't know what those reasons are. And you're right, Suzanne, everybody is different. And how they got there is different. Because if you talk to a lot of people that are experiencing homelessness and you speak to them, there's a wide array of people and tell you a lot of reasons why they're in the position they're in. And there's no one set or one way. So we will do as much as we can. We've already set aside, Tony, what did we set aside? A cent on our property taxes for affordability. And we have been in the affordability game, and we have done a great job with it. Can we do more? As I said, yes. And we will continue to look for ways. But I just want to commend staff for all of the hard work and that y'all have put into this and really thinking this thing through and trying to leverage every one of those dollars to the best of your ability and to get as much as we can out of it. So I thank you, but the pressures that we're all facing is going to continue and may become even greater, understanding we're the largest city east of 95 on the coast. And if you want diversity, if you want jobs, if you want those kinds of things, I think a lot of them will come to this particular area. Not only Wilmington, New Hanover County, but also Brunswick and Pender. And we can see the growth patterns in those areas continue to explode and grow. People always say, oh, the city of Wilmington is growing so bad. And it's growing, don't get me wrong. But at 1.5% is different than 26% across the river, and you see the traffic coming in the morning. And I think that what people don't see in the morning is the traffic is coming in on 17 north, 40 coming from the west, 74, 76, and 17 south coming into this community every day for jobs. And it's a tremendous impact on all of us. So keep up the good work, and we will continue to find ways to leverage every dollar we can to make this, make better choices and bring more housing into the marketplace. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from council? If not, what are the wishes of council? We have a motion to approve by Councilmember Barnett, second by Councilmember Rivenbark. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye. Any opposed? Item passes 6-1. That brings us to the next item of business, which is item R2, which is a resolution of the City Council of the City of Wilmington, North Carolina, authorizing the negotiation of an amendment to an installment financing contract in an amount not to exceed $70 million to finance the acquisition of a downtown campus, including a building, a parking deck, and related property, and providing for certain other related matters thereto. At this time, I'd like to recognize City Manager, Mr. Cottle. Mr. Cottle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Moretti will overview this item for us as well.
Good evening. This item is an overview of the 2023 B, C, and D potential debt issuance and what is included with this financing. The 2023 B, C, and D Series limited obligation bonds will be used to finance the northern downtown campus in an amount not to exceed $70 million to include an office building, parking deck, and adjacent property. The limited obligation bonds do not require voter approval. The financing for this is secured by payments from the city to include a tax increase necessary to pay the debt service for this. When we first brought this project to council, we were estimating a 3-cent possible tax adjustment if we went forward with the purchase of this property to finance it. We were then able to bring it down to 2.5 cents, which is in the attachment documents attached to this item. Since then, we received information from the county tax office giving a projection of our assessed valuation, which we are seeing a growth of over 3% from last year. So that has helped bring this tax rate down, as well as working through our fiscal year 24 budget preparation and seeing where we're going to end 23 at, and being able to utilize funding from our fund balance in the general fund to move over to the debt service, and that also helped bring this tax rate down. So we are now looking at a 1.5 cent tax increase necessary to finance this project if council desires to move forward with it. This financing is also secured by a deed of trust, which we will be utilizing the 2012 deed of trust to secure this issuance as well. These limited obligation bonds, the financing structure for this is split out into 3 different series. The 2023 B series is a taxable variable rate at $23.8 million. This is a 7-year term and callable at any time without penalty. The plan is that with the 7 properties that council has declared surplus contingent on this purchase, as well as the 2 properties included with this purchase that we will also surplus, we will be able to use the proceeds from the sales of those properties to pay down this debt without penalty. The 2023 C series is also taxable fixed rate for $10.2 million. And the 2023 D is tax exempt fixed rate for $34 million. Because there is going to be private use with this purchase, either leasing of office space as well as the parking deck, we are required to have taxable bonds for the allocated amount of private use, so we are being conservative and estimating that at a 50-50 allocation. So 50% of the financing will be taxable and 50% at tax exempt, so that we are sure to comply with IRS regulations. The resolution before you tonight is asking for council to authorize staff to move forward with the steps necessary to set up this financing, as well as call for a public hearing to be held on April 18th. With that public hearing, we'll be asking council to authorize a resolution to move forward with the issuance of the bonds, provided council does decide to move forward with the purchase. We are still in our due diligence period through the end of April. And then in May 2nd, we are asking LGC to approve this financing. We will then price the bonds on June 28th, planning on closing for the bonds on July 12th, tentatively closing on the property the following day. We do have a hard close date of July 31st. And so that's the tight timeline and why we are moving through the process of setting everything up for the financing. Provided we do move forward with this, we will be ready to go and have that closing set by that timeline. And so with that, I'll answer any questions you have.
Mrs. Spears.
Jennifer, you said 1.5 cent, not 1.5%, right?
1.5 cents, yes.
Yeah. just
So
wanted-
currently, our tax rate is 39.5. It will go up to 41 cents per $100 of valuation.
All right. I just wanted you to expound upon that for the audience. it could get very convoluted. Some people just think, people don't think 1.5 cents. We can't see that.
Correct, yes. So just an example, if every 100,000 value of your home would be an additional $15 per year added to your tax rate for this.
Thank you.
Mr. Waddell?
Thank you. And this, kind of a little bit of follow-up to Councilman Spears. This resolution is just for the public watching, because this is obviously a highly publicized issue. This is simply just getting the ball rolling should we decide to move forward with the sale once the due diligence is completed. It's just getting the financing set up.
Correct, correct. Like I said, we have a hard date from the seller that if we do move forward, we need to close by July 31st. In order to meet the deadlines for the LGC approval and being able to go through our 120-day due diligence period, we are having to set everything up to be ready. So when we get the results back from that assessment and council makes the decision, if you do decide to move forward with that, we will have everything ready to go, LGC's approval, and we can move forward with selling the bonds and closing on the property and meeting that deadline. This is a great opportunity for the city, and we want to make sure that we are not out of line with anything to miss that opportunity.
Perfect. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jim. What are the wishes of council in respect to the resolution? We have a motion to approve by Councilman Ravenbach, second by Councilman Barnett. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye. Any opposed? Item passes unanimously. That brings us to our next item of business, which is R3, which is a resolution providing approval of a multi-family housing facility to be known as Cape Fear Hotel Apartments in the city of Wilmington, North Carolina, and the financing thereof with multi-family housing revenue bonds issued by the Wilmington Housing Authority in an amount not to exceed $13,706,000. This time I'd like to recognize the city manager, Mr. Caudill. Mr. Caudill.
Mr. Mayor, Ms. Moretti will come back for her last time this evening to review this item.
Good evening again, Council. This item is financing affordable housing, and because this project is within the jurisdiction of the city, it's required that the City Council vote on it. Joining me tonight is Kristen Kirby. She is with McGuire Woods, who is serving as bond counsel on the project, and Tyrone Garrett with the Wilmington Housing Authority, so they can give you a little bit more information about the structure of this, as well as answer any questions you have on the financing or the project itself.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. My name is Kristen Kirby with McGuire Woods. We are bond counsel for the Wilmington Housing Authority and working with them in connection with this bond issuance. The bond issuance in an amount up to $13,706,000 of tax-exempt bonds will be used to finance the acquisition and rehabilitation of Cape Fear Hotel Apartments, which is an existing affordable housing development for seniors very close by on Chestnut Street. The developer is planning to do a pretty substantial rehabilitation of this project. They're estimating approximately $100,000 per unit in rehabilitation costs. As you may be aware, currently 3 floors of the building are not in use and remain unoccupied after the hurricane damage that happened with Hurricane Florence. So the developer will be building out those floors as well as rehabilitating the units that are currently in use. These bonds are not going to be a debt of the city. The city has no payment responsibility with respect to these bonds. They won't affect the city's debt limit or your legal debt ratios. The payments on the bonds are to be made solely by the developer that is borrowing the funds for this. But by using tax-exempt bonds To finance the project, the developer is able to qualify to receive the low-income housing tax credits that will provide an additional source of funding for the project. As Ms. Moridi mentioned, under the federal tax code, the bonds do have to be approved by the City Council as the governing body that has jurisdiction over the area in which the project is located. Following a public hearing, that public hearing was held by the Wilmington Housing Authority. On March the 7th, there were no public comments made at the hearing. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about the bonds or the project.
When we have one, Mr. Waddell?
Yeah, just to clarify, so the City of Wilmington is essentially the pass-through entity for these funds. Maybe we may ask Rob the wrong term. We don't actually ever touch the funds, but none of this money is the City of Wilmington. It's not coming from the taxpayer of the City of Wilmington.
Yeah, that's correct. You're not even actually the pass-through. The Wilmington Housing Authority is issuing the bonds in this case, but under the federal tax code, for the bonds to be tax exempt, you have to have an approval from the elected legislative body that governs the jurisdiction where the project is located and where the issuer is located. And so in this case, because Wilmington Housing Authority is issuing the bonds and the project is in the City of Wilmington, we have to come before the City Council for this approval.
And then with the updates that are going to be done, will the entire building be able to be occupied? All
Correct.
the units? How many units is that?
A total of about 91 units. So the plan currently is to first build out the top 3 floors so that then they can use what are now new units to move tenants around within the building while they renovate the lower floors so that no tenants will have to be displaced from the building.
I just wanted to make it clear.
Please.
I'm sorry. Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to make it clear that the Housing Authority is not acquiring the property. We're not the developer on the project. We're just going to be that pass-through for the bonds to be issued.
Great. So, any other questions? Okay.
Okay.
All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Good thing. What are the wishes of council in respect to the resolution? We have a motion to approve by Councilmember Barnett, second by Mayor Pro Tem Haynes. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye. Any opposed? Item passes unanimously. That brings us to our next item of business, which is our reports, RP1s, which is Council's Appointments Committee for Boards and Commissions. At this time, I'd like to recognize Councilmember Ryven Barker, who is the chairperson of that committee.
Thank you, Mayor. The Appointments Committee consists of myself, Councilmember Neil Anderson, and Councilmember Luke Waddell. We met on March the 6th, earlier this month, and I'd like to submit the following appointments for the council's consideration. The first one is the Convention Center Advisory Committee. We recommend appointing Christina Haley as a representative from Wilmington Downtown Incorporated with a term to expire 12/7/26. We recommend Fireman's Relief Fund Board of Trustees appointing Scott Monroe as council's representative. Number 3 is the City of Wilmington / New Hanover County Commission for Women. We've recommended appointment of Olivia Timms. It's spelled T-H-A-M-E-S, and I know that in London they call that the Thames River. I don't know if she pronounces it Thames, but that's who we've recommended. Number 4 is the New Hanover County / City of Wilmington Community Relations Advisory Committee. We recommend appointing Victoria McSwain, representing education, with a term to expire 9/20/24. Number 5 is the Downtown Parking Advisory Committee. We recommend appointing Christina Haley, who is the interim director of the WDI. She's going to be the WDI representative to that advisory committee with a term to expire 8/20/2025. Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, we recommend Paul Connor with a term to expire 12/19/26. And the Sister City Commission, appoint Jim Blair as an at-large member with a term to expire 9/1/26. And the Encino Sports Complex Advisory board bylaws, we recommend acceptance of the bylaws. So with those, I would move that our recommendations be considered by council.
We have a motion approved by Councilman Reinbach, second by Councilman Waddell. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item passes unanimously. This concludes our regular agenda. Ms. Everhart, do you have anything?
Yes, sir. We are going to have a closed session for you at the appropriate time. It will take approximately 5 to 10 minutes to cut the cameras off for this room and to have everybody exit. So there will be a short break when you do that, but at the appropriate time.
Very good. Mr. Caudle?
Mr. Mayor, just a quick reminder that a week from this coming Friday, you will have a budget workshop in this room beginning at 8:30 in the morning.
Oh, fun.
Yes, sir. I'm sure you will.
Madam Clerk, Ms. Sudbury, we'll start right, left, left. Mr. Waddell, Mrs. Spears, Mr. Barnett.
Just today I had the opportunity to participate in the Smart Start breakfast where they honored children's champions. And Smart Start does a lot of work with early education, children between 0 and 2,000 days, their first five years of their lives. And it was a great event, and I just want to encourage people to look into programs like that where you can volunteer and help out.
Mr. Anderson. Mayor Pro Tem. Mr. Ravenmar. Okay, with that, I'm going to ask for a motion to enter into a closed session pursuant to the provisions of North Carolina General Statutes, Section 143-318.11A3, in order for City Council to, number one, consult with and provide instruction to the city attorney regarding potential legal claims. The closed session will be held here in council chambers. At this time, all those not included in this closed session need to depart the area or the hall. And once we conclude the closed session, council will reopen its public session here in council chambers. So, do we have a motion? We have a motion by Councilmember Spears, second by Councilmember Barnett. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Item passes unanimously. We will now go into closed session and give the clerk and staff opportunity to do the thing. Thank you.